You're listening to the 4-Phase Cycle Podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of Zesty Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the 4 phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes.
Hello, party people. This is Alex. I am here for a solo podcast with you. I hope that you are having a phenomenal day, evening, night, wherever you are, whenever you're listening. So glad that you are here. Welcome. I'm going to be talking about strategies today. If you've been around here for a little while, you know I'm a big fan of talking about strategies. And it's a really important subject that is actually not specific to any one problem that any one of us has. Strategies are a really fascinating concept at large, and so I wanted to talk about that today. But specifically, I wanted to go into how I think that many of us are essentially falling into keeping ourselves a little stuck from this perspective, and or when we are guiding others, if we are a healer, we are a teacher, we are of service to humans, somehow, how that plays out in strategies. So we're going to dig into all of that today. This topic we have been also teaching. The reason it was on my mind so much is because Megan and I are currently doing our first in-person practitioner certification. So, of course, with the way that we are teaching other practitioners to function the way that Megan and I work and the impact that we make in the world and the transformations that we get, right? Because we get our people transformations so quickly, of course, everyone's like, what is the strategy for that, right? And so as we go through strategies are really everything that we do, everything that we have is a strategy. And it's been so fun this week to begin to get really clear, really granular with our practitioners about this topic. Because once you understand strategies fully, once you can navigate and think through strategies and really make them work for you, it's so powerful. If you are a practitioner listening to this and you're like, oh dang, I want strategies to break through people through where they're stuck, where they're still sick, where they feel small, all of these things, if you have that and you're like, ooh, I want strategies, this is something that we're going to be doing multiple times a year. So keep an eye for that. Reach out to us if you're interested in the practitioner training. We have our first level is what we're doing now, and there's tiers going up, so we even have a practitioner level 2 and beyond, because we are hoping to create, not even hoping, we are creating, and we will create a whole army of practitioners who are going out and serving people in compassionate, loving, passionate, effective ways. So how does strategies fit into this? Well, here's the thing. Strategies define everything that we do, whether it works for us or it doesn't. Everything that we have, in some ways, everything that we do, every action we take, every emotion we end up with, is in some format a strategy. Everything is a strategy, right? We have a strategy for getting out of bed. You have a sequence. You have a strategy for buying things. You have a strategy for health maintenance. You have a strategy for when shit goes south in health. You have a strategy for buyer's remorse. You have a strategy for picking out your partner. You have a strategy for being married to your partner and how that looks. You have a strategy for fighting. You have a strategy for running away from things, right? You have a strategy for overwhelm. You have a strategy for anxiety. So strategies do not always mean that we consciously picked it. And most of us are playing out strategies that when we were growing up and when we were going through things, that was the strategy that worked at that time. And often what happens is that because we are not taught to think in strategies and think through our strategies and understand how our brain is categorizing and how it's thinking through it and how it's signaling for things, we end up sticking with the same strategies that we know rather than developing a toolkit that says, how do I have the strategies that support me in life no matter what's happening, right? The strategy, when I work with people one-on-one, for example, with food, we have strategies for what are the weeks where everything's going great? What's the strategy there with food? What are you doing? How can you habitualize it? How can you make it more easy, more effortless, more flow? And then there's strategies for what about the week where everything's going wrong, everything is piled up, there's lots going on, the kids are sick, the dog threw up, your boss is freaking out, whatever it is, right? And developing those so that we don't get stuck places like, oh, I have this expectation that week in and week out, I'm going to the store, I'm meal prepping, I have this thing, and then a hard week hits and we're like, gosh, I can't do that and I feel bad about it and I always do this, what is wrong with me? Rather than saying, hey, I need to have a toolkit that pulls out a different strategy that I have intentionally thought out and I can lean on. This strategy catches me when the weeks get hard, right? This is what it practically looks like to intentionally create strategies rather than acting from a place of default. But here's the thing, when we're talking about strategies at large, a lot of times people are only looking for helpful strategies, right? What can I do? And sometimes the subtext is, what can I make myself do? And stick with it, right? That stringent meal plan, that one approach. How do I make myself do it week in and week out? And a lot of times in the process of looking at strategies, people will say, well, I want that new strategy, but I have an old strategy. For example, I have to get stressed out and I have to feel like I have that fire lit under me so that I'm motivated to finish. Otherwise, I procrastinate. That's actually a strategy, right? And I've talked about this on the podcast. Beating yourself up, being hard on yourself, putting on the pressure, dumping on yourself can be a motivation strategy, and it can be effective. Many of you, and I've heard from you, that's why I'm saying this, many of you use that strategy because it worked. It got you through school. It got you through your job. It got you through grad school, whatever it is, or entrepreneurship. That's a common one. So when we talk about strategies, our common thinking, the strategy in our society is get rid of the bad ones, get all the good ones, and make sure you can stick to the good ones. And a lot of it is about willpower and showing up and hustling and grind and all that. And of course, if you're here, you've been listening and you know that there's a lot of brain-based hardwiring that happens at these levels. So my argument for strategies is actually very similar to food, because we do the same pattern, the same strategy with food, right? We're like, hey, food matters in health. So how about we take away all the things that are a problem and you eat what's left, right? Here's a list of the things you can have, and here's a list of the things that you can't have. Well, Megan and I saw that. We did that. We learned it. But the thing was, this is what happened with Megan and I, and the reason we got to bust out of that box is actually because of our own eating disorders and a disordered eating history. We were like, man, that just triggers the bejesus out of us, right? It puts us into deprivation. It puts us into stress. We start nitpicking food. We start getting a little crazy, right? And so out of necessity, Megan and I years ago had to look at food and be like, we're learning all the things. I'm going through all the med school classes. I'm doing all the functional medicine stuff. Megan's in the Chris Kresser Adapt program. These are all phenomenal. So we're watching this and the narrative that's happening, but the strategy is not working to apply because we had something in our history, something in our central nervous system that was an obstacle to it. Now, while that's frustrating in some ways at the time, it was actually very good because it allowed us to say, hey, is this the only strategy that exists here, right? Is that the only answer? And what Megan and I's stance now is, and we feel very strongly about this, is that taking out food and pulling out food from people and the things that they like and the things that bring them joy and comfort and remind them of home and connection and all of that, that's the last step of that strategy. Because what we are offering is, hey, what are you going to bring in first? Right? How do you find more enjoyable ways of eating? What would feel good to bring in? What would be nourishing? Rather than starting with, oh, hey, you have to take it out and it's going to be really hard and you have to choose and you're going to have to be really conscientious and you're going to need willpower, right? First, it's kind of like, how can you eat more? How can you have more expansion? How can you feel more free in it? How can you bring in more options? How can you have more things to choose from? That is step number one, because think about it from a safety or a survival mechanism from the brain. How much more successful are you going to be in healing if your strategy for approaching your food first nourishes you, uplifts you, makes you feel that you have options, and only from that place of feeling supported and having those resources. And at that point, it is easier to kind of see how do I want to go about this intentionally? How do I want to choose? What do I want to do next? You bring that in, and then after that is when the peeling off can happen. So that's generally our strategy, right? And that's what we work with people through. Strategies in general, at large, that's our approach as well. And I would even argue that some strategies, it's not even like food. Sometimes with strategies, you don't even have to remove them. You just add them to the mix. For example, I used to do the freak out, get really stressed out, and then I do all the work, right? But here's the thing. While that's problematic day in and day out and has some guilt and shame if that's the only thing I'm using, the fact of the matter is if, let's say, I'm cruising along and everything's great, and then Megan and I have a really great opportunity come up, and I'm kind of like, oh, you know what? I really want to do this. Let's get this done and let's do this, right? That is, to me, I'm kind of like, that's not a bad thing in that situation. I did have to hustle. I had to see that there was a time crunch, and I had to be like, okay, what do I need to do? Do I need to move some stuff? Do I need to clear the calendar? What do I need to do to move this forward? So I'm not really actually saying that I want a strategy gone. What I'm saying is that I want to have choices to pick from so that I don't have to default to something that hurts me when it's not an appropriate time to do it, right? Being motivated by inspiration, being motivated by where you're going, the transformation, the passion that goes into it, right? Towards the goal that you're doing, not away from, oh, I'm scared I won't have money, therefore I need to have sales. Or I'm scared my health will go away, so I better eat healthy. And if I mess up, it must mean that my health is going to go down. Right? All of these things don't feel that great if that's the only thing you've got. But my argument is that, A, you don't have to lose the strategy you have already had working for you to begin with. You can bring in new strategies first and have options. And then from that place, you get to decide, out of the one that I had, the strategy that I had, do I want to let that one go? Or am I simply acknowledging that it's one I will pull out less frequently? Now, there are some strategies that we will decide, and that's from a insightful, supported, optimized place, we will be able to make the determination that no, I actually do not want to use that strategy anymore, right? I want connection, but I push people away. That's a strategy, and you may not ever want that, right? So I'm only giving examples, but there's plenty of things like that. But at the same time, think of being the person that wants to be connected, but feels threatened by other humans and has had unsafe relationship and potentially had trauma and all that stuff. When they push people away, then to say, hey, you have a crappy strategy, we got to get rid of it, and then you got to be perfect on the next one because that's the only one you got. That, even if you know that strategy isn't working, how successful is that person going to be moving forward? They could be very successful eventually, but that road could be really, really bumpy. And that's okay. It's okay when roads are bumpy. Sometimes life's going to life, and that's how it's going to go. But we don't need to place ourselves in scenarios where it is bumpy for no reason at all, right? With the food, we don't have to all at once pull everything out and be like, deprivation is the only strategy, right? There's options. And that is why I love emotions so much, because if we can sit and process the emotions of doing it imperfectly, but the way that you're doing is supporting you because you're giving yourself strategies and you're empowering yourself to have choices and to say that I'm not being forced into this. There's no authority making me do this. I get to pick. I get to choose. I get to fight for what I want, and I get to have my bad days where I love myself anyways. Think of how much more easily you can act empowered when you're in that thinking, rather than that small, survival, threatened, oh my God, what else do I have? What do I need to do? I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm not even good at this new strategy, and I have to get rid of the old one, right? It can work, but I highly, highly recommend that people think about this. You can ultimately decide to pull out a strategy at any given point. And that's going to be a strategy, right? It's kind of like the inception of that is going to be a strategy. But my call to you is, how can you make this really intentional with the main intention of saying, I'm actually going to show myself compassion and love and do this in the way that feels best to me, that supports me, that allows me to choose, and that I can feel proud that I made the choice, I navigated it, and even when I misstepped, I chose again. And I did it, and I did it over and over again until I got to where I was going. When we do that, I literally just gave myself chills. When we do that, we build evidence inside our central nervous system that we are in charge. We take care of ourselves. We make the decision. We have our own back. It gives you courage to power that authenticity, the showing up in the world, and making the impact you want to make. It's so, so powerful. So those are a lot of questions for you, right? There's lots to think about in this, and I'm so excited to hear from you. So I'd love to hear what you think. As always, screenshot this, tag me in the story. I want to hear your ahas, and strategies is something that I'd like to chat about in many different ways as we move forward, because as you can imagine, I have a lot to say about this. So I'll be back, but please reach out to me. Let me know what you found helpful, what your hang-ups are, where you get a little stuck, and then I will follow up with all of the episodes, answering your questions and describing exactly how I do things. Alrighty, thank you so much for joining me for this podcast, and we'll see you next time.
want to hang with us on the podcast. It is our goal to transform the way women are treated in healthcare. And we need your help. We need your help to get the word out. We have a lofty goal of 1 million downloads. And we know that as this podcast grows, we're going to be able to reach more women, get more amazing speakers for you, and bring the most cutting-edge information.
If you found these podclasses helpful, please take a moment to text 5 women you know the link to the series. We appreciate your help so much. Can't wait to see you next time.